not hooked up. Do you want me to wear the... I'm good? Okay. Can everybody hear me? All right. I don't really have a honey lose update. Other than to say it went very well. And before I get started, I am not going to be here next week, and I haven't found anyone to take the class. So I'll just look up here and say if there's anyone, Buster, who would take the class next week. John Ellen. Somebody else can turn the page for you. I'd greatly appreciate that, David Satterfield. Yeah, so if there's anyone who could, please feel free to do so. You can do this, or you can do anything that's on your heart. But we will be finishing with the first book today, or the first section. I am a big Jordan Peterson fan. Anybody else? Yeah, how can you? Yeah, okay. We're just, yeah. Ironically enough, I've never read a single book of his, but I've watched hours of his lectures online from his early days of analyzing Dostoevsky's literature, from Crime and Punishment to Brothers Karamazov, to his now famous debate with Helen Lewis from British GQ. If you haven't seen that one, it's about an hour and 45 minutes of absolute gold. And now on to his current attempt to wrestle with the gospel message through the lens of a clinical psychologist and academic mind, and it really is something to experience. But he's gained, he's a great example as someone who has just gained a tremendous amount of wisdom through education and, more importantly, pain and struggle, which is where you really find wisdom at the other end of, and we'll get to that in a little bit. I don't agree with everything that Peterson says. I think that's an important thing, an important distinction. When confronted by one of the coldest atheists of the day, Richard Dawkins, who repeatedly asked him if he actually believed that Adam existed, Peterson ducked the question, and he said, "It's immaterial. It doesn't matter if I believe that Adam existed. It's the message in the story that's important." And I don't think I can walk down that path with him. So there are things that I disagree with him about, and I can't go there with him. I wish I could, but I believe he'll get there. But one of the many truths that he does express, which the truths that he talked about, they're not new, but the way he approaches them and the arguments that he makes are very fresh, is something that he calls confronting the dragon. If I can get this to go up. Hang on. He calls it confronting the dragon. Now this is a really neat way to look at things, and it has biblical roots as well. Psalm 73:13, "Thou didst divide the sea by thy strength, thou breakest the heads of dragons in the waters." Ezekiel 29:3, "Speak and say, Thus saith the Lord, Behold, I am against thee, Pharaoh, king of Egypt, the great dragon that lieth in the midst of the rivers." And finally, Isaiah 34:13, "And thorns shall come up in her palaces, nettles and brambles in the fortress thereof. It shall be an habitation of dragons." The word dragon is mentioned 21 times in the King James Version of the Old Testament. And I haven't even mentioned Revelation. I think there's 5 chapters that mention the dragon in Revelation. And the context is that the dragon is always something that is feared and seems unbeatable. The dragon is the big scary thing in front of you, is whatever is keeping you from necessary progress in one facet of your life. It's whatever shuts you down. And here's Peterson's point. In Western mythology, or the age of knights, right? Le Morte Arthur, the Knights of the Round Table. What do dragons guard? Treasure, gold, or a fair maiden, right? It's never a handsome dude behind the dragon, okay? And maybe that's the trade-off, right? We have to fight the dragon for the maidens, and the maidens have to have the babies. Fair trade-off, right? Fair trade-off. I was going to throw a joke in there, but I think I gambled last week with the Dallas Cowboys too much, so I'm going to back off of that. But the dragon always guards something of great value. And how do you get the gold? Can you get the gold by walking around the dragon? Can you get the gold by avoiding the dragon? You can't. You just remain poor and walk on. And the difference, Peterson's point is the difference between confronting the dragon and avoiding the dragon is the same difference between naivety and wisdom. There is no virtue in looking away from the darkness. Okay? The only way to wisdom is through the darkness, and we can no longer look away from the darkness when it comes to atheism, because they are winning. There was a survey, I think it was about 3 years ago, that came out in Europe. And for the first time, those who do not believe in God outnumber those who do. 55-45. That's significant, because if you study history, whatever happens in Europe on the social scale eventually does what? Comes here, okay? Europe is the first domino, and we are next, because the number here is getting more and more uncomfortably large. It's not a majority yet. So I think it's time to look at that dragon and fight that dragon. Lewis opens up the next section with a brief discussion of the origins of the universe through the lens of an understanding of those first three principles. The first principle being that there is that moral compass within us that he calls the law of nature, right? That tells us what we ought to do. That's one. And two is that we, in fact, do not follow that law, making it impossible to observe from the outside. So those are the first two. And the third that we got into a little bit last week is that the way we use the term law is a bit useless. We can look at gravity, the law of gravity, and see a rock fall and say, I'm going to call that a law. It doesn't matter if you call it a banana. You're just describing what nature does, regardless of your observation. And what that third sort of concept does to the first two is makes those first two so significant that we call the law of nature a law to begin with. Okay, because we call something a law that can be observed and somehow end up calling something that cannot be observed and is never followed or rarely followed a law just the same. Okay, so if mankind acknowledges a natural law which cannot be casually observed the same way the law of gravity can be observed, then the natural question that will follow is where does that natural law come from? If we all agree that it's a part of us, where does it come from? And again, when you read this book and a lot of Lewis, you sort of, after the first few chapters, you start longing for him to mention the God of Abraham, longing for him to sort of mention Jesus, right? It's like, get there, man, get there. And it's a slow roll to it. But what he's doing is he's describing, maybe not for the reader, but for whoever it is, again, that we're trying to bring into the hallway of belief, to take from non-belief to belief. He's describing to them what it was for himself to be an atheist and find a logical, rational path to belief. And then once he found himself in that hallway, he came to a belief in the God of Abraham and Jesus. And that's sort of the journey that we're going on with him. And in this chapter, he mentions two, and if you look at the footnotes, a third solution to the question of the origins of the universe, right? And starting with a materialistic view, which is what he calls it, basically your atheist view. What is the weapon most used by an atheist to battle the beliefs of Christianity? What's their number one go-to weapon? Say again? The problem of evil? Yep, that's certainly one. Somebody said it. Yeah, and we all have an answer for that, right? Should be total silence. If you've got a few hours, right? And so that's another one. Science, yeah, 100%. Okay, science is their main weapon. Now, we can talk about prominent atheists and their arguments. We can listen to Richard Dawkins, Sam Harris, Stephen Fry, and the late, and I'll say great, Christopher Hitchens, whom I absolutely loved and miss, ironically enough, because he was a staunch atheist, but he was willing to make some concessions, and I think that he was close, but he sadly died before he was able to do so. And in the end, doubled down on his atheism, which was a sad thing to see. There may be some hope for Stephen Fry, but we'll see. He was on a podcast with Jordan Peterson recently, which was a wonderful thing, but he did not move. We can talk about these men in their positions at length, but we need to make up some time to get to the whole God of Abraham and Jesus thing. So we're going to sort of nutshell this, and I promise that God is coming. The God of Abraham and Jesus is coming, okay? And we are going to get to it. But let's nutshell the scientific perspective of the origins of the universe, and we can boil it down to one basic thing. This is the scientific perspective of the origins of the universe. All of it can be boiled down to one thing: coincidence. We can go into Darwin. We can talk about evolution. We can talk about the simulation. We can talk about string theory, which we actually will in a minute. But we can discuss at length all the theories believed to be true. But when we bring it all down to a singular question, coincidence is the best that science can do. Can somebody give me a nutshell of the Big Bang Theory? Not the show. There it is. You got to remove one word, right? There was a bang, right? But we'll get to the God said bang in the universe. We'll get to that. That might be even more interesting than atheism, and possibly more dangerous when you meld the two. But we'll talk about it in a second.
I told somebody that they believe that matter has always been, and I believe that God has always been. I think that's the difference.
Yeah, that is a difference. But that leaves a pesky question, right, for science, that they get very upset when you ask it. But yeah, anyone else want to take a shot at the Big Bang? It's kind of in the phrase, right? in the phrase the Big Bang. Hmm. Yeah, you're referencing something very much akin to the idea of spontaneous generation, right? Um, wh- right. Which is a building block of science, right? I mean, it's a building block of science. The negation of spontaneous generation, which is something cannot come from nothing. But science has built the theory of the origins of the universe on that very thing. That at one point in time, something came from nothing. And I'll use Richard Dawkins as an example here because he can't stand this question. He was in a movie called Expelled a long time ago with Bueller, what's his name? So, oh, not Matthew. The teacher who's like the teacher. He's an economist, huh? Yeah, Stein. Um, he did a movie called Expelled, and he was getting at the why creationism is just not acceptable, right? You'll get expelled from the universities and schools for teaching creationism. And he has Richard Dawkins right there, and he just kept saying, and where'd that come from? Well, the matter came. Oh, where'd that come from? And Dawkins is getting visibly upset. And at the end, he hadn't quite gotten his ducks in a row, which they have, by the way, and it's something that we need to be aware of. He hadn't gotten his ducks in a row at this point in time. He wasn't expecting that kind of pressure. And at the end, he just frustratingly said, "Maybe aliens put it here," and walked right back in the door he was trying to get out of. Right? Where did the? Okay. So the entirety of the scientific perspective of the origins of the universe is something that science itself says is impossible, and it's a great place to start. Now, what atheists have rallied around is an answer that Dawkins gave a couple of years ago to the same question, but he knew it was coming. Okay, and the way he answered the question was with dismissiveness and humor, which makes it a very, very powerful catchphrase. That's how bumper stickers are created. Okay, and they stick, and it goes like this. If you'll grant us, science, one miracle, we'll grant you, religion, all the miracles you want. Okay, so even the leading guy says we still don't have an answer, but his dismissive tone in that statement settled the argument as far as this side is concerned. And that is what they will say to you if you press that. Because it's off-putting, it's humorous, and it's dismissive. It's easy for them to walk around that dragon, okay, and avoid that dragon. I want to spend some time with this because 20 years ago it was dismissive. Europe wasn't 55-45, non-belief to belief. Even 40 years ago, you rarely heard about it because if you were an atheist, you didn't say anything to anyone. It was shameful. Okay, now it's a badge of honor that gives you credibility in academic circles. And it's almost like we decided to just say, okay, you can have academics and you can have entertainment, right? We'll stay in this pocket over here and this is ours, you can have that. That wasn't wise. Okay, but I do want to say this about science. It is a religion. It's being treated as a religion, and it is one of the most unreliable religions ever conceived of. And if you think about it in these terms, science has its place. Lewis goes into this, and science should be something like, I pointed the telescope to this direction in the nighttime sky at 2:20, this is what I saw, right? Or I put some things in a kettle, heated it up, and this is what happened, and this is what I observed, right? All of that boiled down to, let's assume that all of it can be figured out by science. Science has answered every question. They have, the answer ready. But even if that were the case, it's never going to solve a simple question, which is why? Why is the universe here? Why are we here? Why? Science can have all of it, and they'll never get close to doing away with that question. And that question is part of that moral compass. It's part of that curiosity to solve why it is that we feel we ought to do something and feel guilty when we do not. But science, since the Enlightenment of the 1750s, on into the Industrial Revolution, onto the modern era, right up to this day, science, this religion, has to revise itself about every 10 or 15 years. Don't they? Say again?
Because its conclusions they find out were wrong.
Yes, they find out that they were wrong, but what was their attitude before they found out they were wrong?
Everything is a theory.
Oh, yes, well, until we call it something else, right? And again, you can call it a banana, but if you let go of it, a rock's going to hit the ground. So we can call it a theory, or we can just say that it's a law. But as a religion, every 20 years, they have to change their mind and make concessions. Okay, and it sounds something like this. We now know that the cell is a simple structure. We now know everything. We have a microscope. And in the vein of Nietzsche, God is dead. Well, as it turns out, folks, the cell is not a simple structure. It's amazingly complex. So we were wrong then. But now, we know everything. Except that whole, radium thing. You can't drink that. Don't drink that. Right? We thought you could. We thought it was a medicine. You know what? We were wrong, but now that we know you should not take that as medicine, you should avoid it with everything you have. Now, we know everything. Is Pluto still a planet? No. See, now it's 9 pizzas or pizza's 9 or whatever it is. Now there's no pizza. All right? My very educated mother apparently didn't bake anything, right? So understand how much credibility science has given and match that up with the fact that nothing I just told you was incorrect. Have they or have they not had to reorganize their thinking and apologize and correct, their direction every 10 or 15 years? But there's where all the credibility lies in our secular society, in a society that is very quickly eclipsing the society of belief. It's a dragon we can't look away from anymore. It's there.
One thing
Yeah.
I'm reading about jobs that were no longer around, and one of the jobs they mentioned was leech collectors for medicinal purposes.
You almost gave me another honey loo story. Leech collectors. Poor fellas. They're out of a job. Yeah. I'm going to give you a little spoiler alert of what's coming in the scientific community. And if you watch, Joe Rogan podcast, frankly, he was on there saying it. Eric Weinstein. Does anyone know who Eric Weinstein is? He's one of the leading physicists, right? They're about to have to do it again. Who's familiar with string theory? Can anyone give me a nutshell of that? You did this. You've heard the term. That's what the guys, were researching on what show that I mentioned her? Big Bang Theory, right? And there's this great line when Leonard is talking to some girl he wants to date. She asks him what he does, and he's like, well, I'm a physicist. I study string theory. And she goes, oh, what's new? You remember what his response was? Can anyone tell me what his response was? Nothing. Okay, string theory it originates in 1968. Let me check my notes to make sure that I'm right, and not to give you the idea that I knew this all along. 1968. Originated in 1968. So I thought that was a funny line when I heard it, but it stuck, right? And I was like, what a funny line. But can anyone tell me how many breakthroughs in string theory have been achieved in the last 56 years? You can count them on one hand as long as that hand has no fingers. 0. None. 56 years of dominating an area of study. They haven't been able to challenge it because certain minds that control the area of physics, right, will not do what? The dragon's whooping up on them. But they can't avoid it anymore. And Weinstein said that we're taking those steps. All right? Now, that's not saying Weinstein's going to replace string theory with the New Testament. Okay? But there's going to be this delicious moment, and it's coming, where science once again has to say, you know? And we can all just sort of sit back and go, yeah, we know. We already know. Because what hasn't changed? What hasn't changed? What's never once had to go back on itself? I am. Oh man, that's powerful. Sorry. Isaiah 46, 9 through 10. This is, I've never heard it quoted, and I Googled it. Sorry. I wanted one that wasn't often given. Isaiah 46, 9 through 10. Remember the former things of old, for I am God. Just the start of it puts the past, the present, and the future squarely with whom? God. Remember the former things of old. I am God. We see the past and the present, but it doesn't matter, right? It doesn't matter what day it is, right? It doesn't matter what time it is, what season it is, what year it is. Every time you read that, it's present. I am God. That's past, present, and future. Remember the former things of old, for I am God, and there is none else. I am God, and there is none like me. And then verse 10 really drives it home. Declaring the end from the beginning. Declaring the end from the beginning and from ancient times, the things that are not yet done, saying, my counsel shall stand, and I love the way this ends, and I will do all my pleasure. Why? Because he is God and we are not. Remember the former things of old. It's not a situation where every 20 years the Bible has to apologize for itself. Let's get back to the dragon for a second. I've referenced this before, but in The Hobbit, Mr. Baggins is at the climax of his journey. They've reached the mountain, the lonely mountain, and it's his job to go down the secret passage down to what? The Hobbit. Down to what? The dragon. Right? How wonderfully apropos, right? The dwarves are going to stay outside because they've been afraid the entire time. And they send Mr. Baggins down into the tunnel to confront the dragon. He gets halfway through and he stops. Okay? And this may be where we are. He stops in that tunnel and says to himself, what am I doing? I can go right back out that tunnel, out the secret door that I came in, past those dwarves, find my way home, and be the person I've always been, with a few good stories to tell. Or I can travel down this tunnel and I can confront the dragon, and I will never be the same again. And of course, he makes that choice to go on down. Do you see the connection here? Where are we? Right? Now, does he defeat the dragon? No, he doesn't. Okay? But he starts the battle. Okay? And Emma Canfield, what does Mr. Baggins notice about the dragon? Say again? I know it was in your heart, Emma. I know it was in your heart. Okay? Yeah, there's a patch in the hollow of his left breast, as bare as a snail out of its shell, is the quote. He sends that with a bird to Bard at Lake Town, who, when the dragon flies over, sees it and shoots it. But if he never goes down to confront the dragon, what does he never get to do? What never happens? The dragon is never conquered. If we choose voluntarily to confront the dragon, we can beat the dragon. What's your dragon? I can tell you what mine is. Me. Okay? I'm my dragon. I'm standing in front of me all the time. I can't get out of my own way. Okay? But your dragon's different. It may be the same as mine. I don't know. But everybody has different dragons because we're all on different mile markers of the path that we're all traveling in the same direction, and that is home. You need help with your dragon. I need help with my dragon. And if we don't tell our loved ones what dragons we're facing, we can't be there for each other. There's no accountability. There's no walking together. You can't be on that path by yourself. Now, voluntary exposure to that which freezes and terrifies you, that's confronting the dragon. And how else do you summarize the words of Christ? Pick up your cross and follow me. He's not saying pick up your minor inconveniences and follow me. We're too comfortable here. We're so comfortable here in the United States that the word safety now has a social component to it. Safety now means not saying things that might offend someone else. Go to a war zone. That word changes completely. What safe means. Pick up your cross and follow me. Pick up that which may kill you, or that which you may die upon, and follow me. That's my goal, folks. It really is. I hope we all have a similar goal.